Thunder rattles the walls of Willow Creek Animal Rescue. In the chaos, one big, unadoptable dog, returned again, waits for someone to believe he's more than just trouble. But tonight, when everyone else gives up, a quiet widow named Carolyn stands up and says, "I'll try. Just one more time." What happens next isn't just a rescue. It's a journey that will test a whole town's heart, break it, and gently put it back together. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you joining us from today? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe love means never giving up, even when it's messy, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a story of hope and second chances. Thunder crashed so hard, it rattled the chain-link runs of Willow Creek Animal Rescue. The windows shivered with each jagged flash, and the musty, comforting scent of wet fur and pine cleaner couldn't hide the edge of panic in the air. It was nearly midnight, and the shelter was chaos. Dogs barked, howled, or cowered in their crates, and rain hammered the roof like it was trying to break through. At the center of it all stood Buddy, a chocolate lab so big and muscular, he looked almost like a bear. He was pacing his kennel, nails clicking against the concrete, brown eyes wide with confusion and fear. Alex Turner, the night manager, hadn't even taken off his rain-soaked jacket. His sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as he wrestled the back door closed, shoulders hunched against the storm and the scene unfolding behind him. He glanced at Buddy, then at the cluster of staff gathered in the hallway, everyone soaking, everyone tense. In the vestibule, a young couple stood awkwardly, their faces pale, a mix of regret and embarrassment. "We're sorry," the woman said, her voice barely louder than the rain. He's too much for us. We thought we could handle it. We really did." Her partner nodded, lips pressed in a thin line. "He's strong, and he just never settles down. We can't keep him." Buddy stared at the pair, his tail thumping hopefully, body vibrating with the desperate need to please. He didn't understand. He only knew these people had fed him, scratched his ears, and taken him for long, joyful runs in the woods. Now their hands were empty, their smiles gone. He whined, then barked, a deep, booming sound that echoed off tile and glass. Alex kept his voice gentle, hiding his frustration behind practiced calm. "Thank you for bringing him back safe. We'll take it from here." As the door closed behind the couple, a flash of lightning illuminated the intake board, a calendar crowded with adoption attempts and returns. Next to Buddy's name, another red X appeared. Again. A local TV news van was parked outside, headlights piercing the gloom. Earlier that week, Willow Creek had made the news for its overcrowding, for the story of the giant, unadoptable dog who kept bouncing from home to home. Now, the headlines felt like judgment. How many chances does one dog deserve? The staff melted away to finish nightly chores, but Alex stayed with Buddy, crouching beside the kennel, letting the lab sniff his hand through the bars. "Hey, big guy. Rough night, huh?" Buddy pressed his massive head against the wire, seeking warmth, connection, anything to soothe the ache inside him. A crash echoed from the back as a frightened terrier overturned a food bowl. Someone cursed softly, doors slammed. Buddy flinched and barked again, louder this time, making the other dogs jumpy. Alex sighed, knowing tonight would be long. He opened Buddy's kennel, bracing himself for the usual mayhem, but Buddy surprised him, just standing there, tail drooping, body trembling. Alex looped the leash, expecting a fight, but Buddy leaned into him as if searching for protection from the storm both outside and inside. He doesn't know what he's done wrong, Alex thought, leading Buddy to a quieter room near the front desk. The storm's noise was muffled here, and Alex settled onto a bench, Buddy curling up awkwardly at his feet. For a few moments, there was peace. The lights flickered, shadows playing across the whiteboard, lists of names, medical records, adoption hopes scribbled in colored marker. The phone rang. Alex let it go to voicemail. He stared at the returns column, at the mounting pressure from the board, from donors, from the community. "Too much dog," someone had written in red beside Buddy's file. Alex's gut twisted. Too much what? Energy? Love? Need? He remembered Buddy's first arrival, a stray found chasing ducks at the park, tail wagging, mouth smiling. The staff had fallen for him instantly, but Buddy was strong, exuberant, a bulldozer of affection and play. Families loved him for a day, a week, a month, until he chewed a doorframe, knocked over a child, dragged someone across a field chasing squirrels. Each return chipped away at Buddy's confidence and the staff's hope. Tonight, the wind screamed against the walls, and Alex felt the shelter's collective heartbreak settle over him like a weight. Buddy whined, shifting closer. Alex rubbed his head, the fur soft, ears warm. "I know, Bud. I know." In the lobby, a newspaper lay open, the headline circled in pen. "Is it time to give up on Willow Creek's big dog?" Tomorrow, Alex knew, the phones would ring off the hook. Angry neighbors, opinionated strangers, animal control. Social media would light up with debates. Some would say Buddy was dangerous, unfixable. Others would demand a miracle. Buddy sighed, stretching out, huge paws twitching. Alex wondered if the dog dreamed of running, or if he just drifted in circles, searching for a place to belong. Thunder shook the windows. Buddy startled, then curled tighter, eyes shining with a raw, confused hope. Alex promised himself, not for the first time, that he wouldn't give up. Not tonight. But as the shelter settled into uneasy silence, the question hovered, unspoken and sharp. How many second chances are too many? And who decides when a heart is just too much for this world? The rain kept falling, a relentless, echoing reminder that storms, both outside and inside, don't last forever. But for now, in the battered safety of Willow Creek, one big dog and one tired man faced the night together, holding on until morning. Morning didn't bring peace, just a relentless drizzle and the sour tension of a shelter on edge. By 8 a.m., Willow Creek Animal Rescue buzzed with gossip and judgment. The overnight news segment had already aired. Buddy's broad face stared out from the TV, tongue lolling, eyes confused. The headline below him read, "How many chances should one dog get?" Alex switched it off, rubbing his tired eyes. He'd spent half the night coaxing Buddy to sleep with the hum of an old radio, sitting cross-legged on the linoleum until his back ached. The exhaustion clung to him, but there was no time to rest. Staff gathered around the break room table, coffee steaming, voices low and anxious. Some argued for giving Buddy one more shot, but others were blunt. Too many bites of hope, too many returns. "We can't keep risking it," said Lorraine, the senior volunteer. "If he hurts someone, we're finished." The room fell silent as the director, Marcia, read aloud a stack of angry emails. Parents worried, neighbors accusing the shelter of putting the community in danger. Meanwhile, outside in the kennel run, Buddy paced back and forth, pausing only to bark at the gray sky. He could sense something was wrong. Dogs always could, but he didn't know what. He pressed his face to the fence whenever a staff member passed, tail wagging tentatively, body tense, as if asking, "What now?" Do I stay? Do I go? At 10 a.m., the board called an emergency meeting. Alex sat in the corner, Buddy's leash still looped around his wrist, knuckles white. Marcia laid out the facts. Buddy had been adopted and returned 4 times in 8 months. Each family had meant well. Pictures of smiling children and backyard play sessions filled Buddy's file. But all ended the same. Chewed furniture, muddy floors, a toppled toddler, a complaint about his barking. Each story ended with, "He's just too much for us." "But he's not aggressive," Alex argued. "He's just big, energetic. He needs someone who understands him." "People are scared," Lorraine shot back. "We have other dogs. Easier, quieter, less trouble. Buddy's taking up space, time, and resources." The question loomed, heavy and painful. Is it ever okay to give up on a dog? Nobody wanted to say it aloud, but the possibility hung in the air. Euthanasia, the unspoken threat that haunted every shelter worker. Alex clenched his jaw, willing someone to offer another way. That's when Carolyn Miller entered. Raincoat buttoned to her chin, graying hair tucked beneath a faded Cubs cap. At 70, Carolyn cut a humble figure. Tall, thin, a little stooped, but with a dignity that made people listen. She'd been volunteering at Willow Creek for years, reading to the animals, walking the lonelier dogs, always with a gentle word. After her husband's death, the shelter had become her refuge. She listened to the debate, hands folded, expression calm. When Alex described Buddy's night, the trembling, the longing for connection, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching for an answer only she could hear. When the director finished, Carolyn stood. "I'd like to foster him," she said, voice steady but soft. "Just for a while. I have the time. I know the risks. Let's see what happens." The room erupted, some with gratitude, others with alarm. "Are you sure, Carolyn? He's a handful," Marcia warned. "He's stronger than he looks," added Lorraine. "He'll tear up your house." "I know," Carolyn replied, meeting each doubt with a calm resolve. "But sometimes, when everyone else has given up, what's left is to try one more time. If he fails with me, at least we'll know." Alex's heart leapt with relief. "I'll help. We'll set you up with everything. Food, crate, training supplies. I'll come by every day if you want." The paperwork was done by noon. The shelter's Facebook page posted an update, "Buddy has one more chance." And within hours, comments flooded in. Some supportive, some outraged. People debated, argued, took sides. Why keep a dog that can't fit in? Every animal deserves a home. The whole town was watching. When Carolyn returned that afternoon, she wore jeans and sturdy boots, a determined glint in her eye. Alex brought Buddy out on a double leash, the big lab lunging with excitement, almost dragging him across the lobby. Staff watched, breath held, as Buddy sniffed Carolyn's shoes, tail whipping. For a moment, there was quiet. Buddy looked up at Carolyn, brown eyes searching hers, and she knelt to meet him. "Hi there, Buddy," she said. "I heard you're looking for a friend." Buddy sat, awkward, hopeful, then pressed his head into her chest. Carolyn laughed, surprised by his gentleness, but also by how much she wanted to believe in him. Alex handed her the leash. "Call me any time," he said, voice thick. "For anything." Carolyn nodded, her hand trembling slightly. As she led Buddy toward her old silver Subaru, a few staff members watched from the window, worry and hope mingling in their faces. Driving home, Carolyn glanced at Buddy in the rearview mirror. He lay sprawled across the back seat, tongue lolling, eyes closed, as if already dreaming of something better. But her own heart pounded. What if they're right? What if I can't do this? She thought of all the people who hadn't given up on her. Her late husband, her daughter, the teachers who'd urged her to try again after every setback. When she pulled into her driveway, the rain had stopped. The air felt washed clean, like a new beginning. She opened the door, and Buddy bounded out, sniffing every blade of grass, every stone, as if discovering the world for the first time. Carolyn took a deep breath, feeling fear and hope entwined inside her. Inside, the house was quiet, still echoing with old memories. Buddy trotted in, tail high, knocking over a lamp with his wagging. Carolyn smiled despite herself. It begins, she thought. Let's see what happens when no one gives up. Back at the shelter, Alex updated the log, relief flooding through him. For the first time in weeks, a sense of possibility filled Willow Creek. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, just maybe, love would be bigger than everyone's doubts. Carolyn's home had always felt a little too silent ever since her husband passed, and her daughter, Erica, moved across the country for work. The ticking of the old wall clock echoed in the stillness. The refrigerator hummed, and the wind rattled the panes. But mostly, there was a hush that settled into the bones of the little yellow house at the edge of Maplewood Lane. For years, Carolyn had filled that silence with books, radio, and the company of shelter animals who came and went. But as she opened the door with Buddy tugging eagerly at his new leash, she realized she had underestimated just how much one dog could disrupt the quiet. Buddy burst inside like a whirlwind, his big paws scrambling for traction on the hardwood. The first thing he did was knock over a vase, shattering it with a thud and splash. Carolyn flinched, but she forced herself to take a steadying breath. "This is why you're here, remember?" She bent down, patted his head, and said, "Well, that didn't last long, did it?" Buddy sniffed every inch of the living room, his nose pressed to the couch cushions, the curtains, even the lamp cords. When he reached the kitchen, he discovered his reflection in the oven door and barked, startled, his tail wagging so hard it smacked the cupboards. Carolyn tried to keep up, but she was more used to slow walks and quiet afternoons than the sheer momentum of Buddy's curiosity. Within an hour, he'd knocked over his water bowl twice, chewed one of her slippers, and sent a stack of mail flying off the coffee table with a single exuberant leap. By the time evening rolled in, Carolyn was exhausted. She heated up leftover chicken soup, sitting at the kitchen table as Buddy circled restlessly, pacing between the door and the window, stopping now and then to whine or bark at sounds outside, a car door, a distant siren, or the wind in the trees. When she tried to watch a movie, Buddy plopped himself on the rug and began chewing a throw pillow, tufts of stuffing fluttering like snow. Despite the chaos, Carolyn couldn't help but notice the little glimmers of gentleness in him. Whenever she sat down, Buddy would pause his wild exploration and trot over to rest his chin on her knee, looking up with those soulful brown eyes. When she petted him, his tail thumped softly against the floor, and he sighed, a long, weary sound that made her heart twist. That night, after she'd managed to corral Buddy outside for one last bathroom break, Carolyn retreated to her bedroom and closed the door, needing a moment of peace. She could hear him snuffling at the other side, his claws clicking against the hardwood, a low whimper rising now and then. For a moment, she hesitated. Should she let him in? Was she setting herself up for another night of destroyed shoes and chaos? But the loneliness on the other side of the door felt too familiar. She cracked it open. Buddy pushed through, tail sweeping the air, and curled up on the rug at the foot of her bed. He rested his head on his paws, eyes wide and anxious, ears twitching at every creak and groan of the old house. Carolyn lay awake, staring at the shadows moving on the ceiling, remembering the days after her husband's funeral, the way every room seemed to echo with absence. She realized that Buddy's confusion, his desperate longing to belong, wasn't so different from her own. In the small hours, she woke to find Buddy sitting beside her bed, panting quietly, his nose nudging her hand. She stroked his head and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." Buddy sighed and after a while curled back up. The room felt a little warmer, a little less empty. Over the next few days, they settled into a lopsided routine. Mornings were the hardest. Buddy woke at sunrise, eager for walks, breakfast, play. Carolyn shuffled behind him, bundled in her old robe and slippers, sometimes tripping over the leash as Buddy zigzagged down the block, nose to the ground, tail a banner of excitement. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, some smiling, others wary. Everyone had heard about the big shelter dog on the local news. Buddy's energy seemed endless, but Carolyn was patient. She learned to hide her slippers, to keep the pantry door shut tight, and to reward Buddy for the smallest successes: a calm sit, a gentle walk, a quiet moment at her feet. Every night, she wrote notes in a small blue journal, tracking their progress. "Buddy didn't bark at the mailman today. He let me brush his ears. Didn't chew the couch." Small victories. But progress came in fits and starts. One afternoon, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in, shaking the windows. Buddy panicked, whining, pacing, pawing at the back door, as if he could escape the noise. Carolyn sat on the floor beside him, letting him press his big body against hers, speaking softly until he finally settled, his breathing slowing. She thought of all the times she had wanted to run from her own storms, from grief and fear and the feeling of being too much for the world. In the evenings, when the world grew quiet and Buddy finally flopped down beside her, Carolyn allowed herself to hope. Sometimes, Buddy would lift his head and rest it on her lap, sighing deeply, and she would scratch his ears and whisper, "We'll figure this out, you and me." Sometimes, he'd follow her from room to room, unwilling to let her out of his sight. Gradually, Carolyn realized that the quiet in her house was different now. It wasn't empty. It was expectant, alive with the sound of paws on hardwood, the jangle of a collar, the soft snore of a dog dreaming at her feet. The loneliness didn't vanish, but it softened, wrapped in the warmth of another living soul trying, just like her, to belong. For the first time in a long while, Carolyn found herself looking forward to tomorrow. By the third week, Carolyn and Buddy had begun to find a kind of rhythm, a tentative partnership built on patience, trial and error, and a mutual, unspoken hope. It didn't come quickly. It didn't come easily. But it grew, slow as the daffodils rising outside the kitchen window, steady as the ticking of Carolyn's old clock. Morning started with Buddy's nose nudging her elbow at sunrise, the great dog ready for the day before she'd even had her first sip of coffee. Carolyn grumbled but rose, bundling herself in her blue windbreaker, Buddy's leash looped firmly in hand. Their neighborhood walks became ritual, Buddy sniffing every mailbox and garden gnome, Carolyn waving to neighbors she'd barely known before. Some stopped to chat, curious about the infamous big shelter dog. Others simply nodded, their skepticism plain. But gradually, Carolyn noticed smiles, cautious at first, then genuine, as Buddy learned to sit calmly at her side while she spoke with Mrs. Jensen about hydrangeas, or listened to Mr. Greenfield's complaints about the city's potholes. The daily routine became their anchor. After breakfast, Carolyn set aside time for training, using tips Alex had given her and videos she found online. Buddy was distractible, wild at times. He'd leap for a treat one moment, bolt after a squirrel the next. But Carolyn learned to celebrate the tiny victories. A perfect stay, a gentle down, a walk completed without Buddy dragging her into someone's azaleas. She wrote each success in her journal at night, even on days when progress felt almost invisible. Afternoons belonged to the porch, sunlight streaming through the wind chimes. Buddy would stretch out on the worn boards, head in Carolyn's lap as she read aloud. Sometimes the newspaper, sometimes chapters from her favorite mystery novels. She told Buddy about her husband, about Erica and her new life in Seattle, about the loneliness that crept in when she least expected it. Buddy didn't understand the words, but he listened. The slow thump of his tail a comfort against her ankle. One afternoon, a delivery truck rumbled up the street, its engine backfiring loudly. Buddy startled, hackles raised, body rigid. Carolyn reached for him, voice low and steady. "It's okay, boy. I'm right here." She sat beside him on the porch, hand resting on his neck, feeling his muscles quiver. Slowly, Buddy's breathing evened out. He glanced at her, eyes wary, then finally relaxed. That night, Carolyn wrote, "He trusts me a little more each day. Maybe I'm learning to trust again, too." Still, there were setbacks. Rainstorms sent Buddy into a panic. He'd hide beneath the kitchen table, trembling until Carolyn coaxed him out with a blanket and soothing words. On one bad day, he tore up a pillow, scattering feathers through the living room. Carolyn scolded him, then sat down, exhausted, surrounded by the mess. Buddy crept to her side, ears drooping, and laid his head in her lap, as if apologizing for every home he'd ever lost. Carolyn stroked his head, whispering, "I know it's hard. I know you're trying." Gradually, the house changed. Buddy's leash hung by the door, his favorite squeaky toy on the rug. Pictures of Erica and her dad stood on the mantel, now joined by a framed photo Alex had taken. Carolyn and Buddy on their first walk, the big lab grinning, tongue out, Carolyn's arm around his neck. The house was still quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet, filled with the sounds of living. Neighbors began to notice changes in Carolyn, too. She laughed more easily, her step lighter, her eyes brighter when she greeted friends at the mailbox or the grocery store. Some stopped to ask how Buddy was doing, sharing stories of their own dogs and advice on training. Buddy became a fixture on Maplewood Lane, a big, friendly shadow at Carolyn's side, his reputation slowly shifting from trouble to work in progress. Carolyn, for her part, started journaling every evening, not just about Buddy, but about herself. She wrote about her fears, of failing, of being too much, of losing hope, and how Buddy's journey mirrored her own. Sometimes she wrote letters to Erica she never sent, describing the ways Buddy had cracked open the loneliness she'd worn like armor. Other times, she wrote lists of things she was grateful for. "Buddy didn't bark at the doorbell today. I made a new friend at the park. The house feels less empty." Every now and then, Alex would stop by with treats or training tips. He watched Buddy's progress with a mix of pride and awe. "You're both doing better than anyone expected," he told Carolyn one afternoon, handing her a new harness. "Sometimes the dogs who need us most are the ones who teach us the most." Carolyn smiled, feeling seen in a way she hadn't for years. One Saturday, Carolyn and Buddy walked to the farmer's market. Crowds bustled, children darted between stalls, and live music drifted from the gazebo. Buddy tensed at first, eyes wide at the noise and motion, but Carolyn knelt beside him, hand steady on his collar. "We're okay," she murmured. "Just stick with me." By the end of the morning, Buddy was accepting head scratches from strangers, sniffing bouquets of sunflowers, and lying quietly beneath Carolyn's bench as she sipped lemonade and watched the world go by. That night, as the sunset painted the sky with lavender and gold, Carolyn sat on the porch with Buddy's head in her lap. The wind stirred the chimes, and for the first time in a long while, Carolyn felt the peace that comes not from solitude, but from companionship. The kind you have to earn, one patient day at a time. She looked down at Buddy, sleeping deeply, and realized they weren't just surviving together. They were healing. As summer edged into July, the air in Willow Creek grew heavy with anticipation for the annual Dog Days Festival, a raucous weekend of food trucks, music, and contests celebrating rescue animals. Posters for the festival papered every shop window in town, and the local news promised it would be the biggest turnout yet. This year, there was even more buzz. For weeks, people whispered about Buddy, the infamous chocolate lab with the checkered past. Some hoped to see him prove everyone wrong. Others expected disaster. Carolyn was caught in the crossfire. Every time she walked Buddy, someone would stop her, sometimes just to ask how the big dog was doing, other times to hint, not so subtly, that bringing him to the festival would be brave, or maybe too soon. She tried to shake off the doubts, but they clung to her like humidity. The festival, she knew, was noisy, crowded, unpredictable. 3 things Buddy struggled with. Yet deep down, she wondered if it was time for both of them to face their fears. The morning of the festival dawned bright and hot. Buddy paced at the door, tail wagging and nerves sparking off him in waves. Carolyn double-checked his harness and clipped on a second leash for safety. Her hands trembled as she tied a red bandana around his neck, the one Erica had sent from Seattle with a note. For Buddy's big day. Show them what love can do. As they arrived at the festival, the sights and sounds overwhelmed even Carolyn. A carousel spinning in the distance, children shrieking with laughter, dogs of every shape and size barking greetings and challenges. Music thundered from speakers near the main stage. Vendors hawked treats and toys. Buddy shrank beside her, his head low, tail uncertain. The leash tightened in Carolyn's hand as they squeezed past a row of booths. People parted around them, some reaching out to pet Buddy, others drawing back, whispering. At first, it was rough. A passing terrier barked in Buddy's face, setting off a chain reaction. Buddy lunged, nearly pulling the leash from Carolyn's grip. She gritted her teeth, anchoring herself. "Buddy, easy," she commanded, voice steady but urgent. He spun in anxious circles, whining, his body taut as a drawn bow. Some onlookers watched with skepticism, waiting for him to fail. Others shook their heads, muttering, "Told you so." Carolyn felt every stare like a weight. Sweat beaded on her brow. Was this a mistake? Should she turn around, take Buddy home, retreat before disaster struck? Her heart hammered, but she remembered all those quiet nights with Buddy's head in her lap, the patient work they'd done, the promise she'd made to give him a real chance. She knelt, cupping his face. "We're okay, Bud. I'm not leaving. Not today." Gradually, they made their way to the shade of a maple tree on the edge of the field. Carolyn sat on the grass, Buddy pressed close, his body trembling. She stroked his back, humming softly. The festival roared on, pie-eating contests, relay races, a dog costume parade, but Buddy seemed to settle, soaking up her calm. Then, the unexpected happened. In the swirl of the crowd, a little boy named Mason, maybe 6 or 7, became separated from his mother. Mason's panic rose fast, a lost child's shriek that cut through the noise. People turned, startled. The boy darted through the legs of strangers, face streaked with tears, and fell hard to the ground, sobbing, unable to catch his breath. Buddy snapped to attention. He tensed for a moment. Then, as if guided by something deeper than training, pulled free of Carolyn's gentle grip and trotted toward the boy. Carolyn's heart jumped, panic, then dread. But Buddy approached Mason slowly, tail wagging low, body language soft and inviting. The boy froze, staring up at the giant lab with wide, wet eyes. Buddy lowered himself to the ground beside Mason, close but not touching, and let out a quiet whine, a gentle, almost musical sound. Mason's cries slowed, then stopped. He reached out, tentative, placing a trembling hand on Buddy's head. Buddy leaned into the touch, then rolled onto his side, exposing his belly in a gesture of trust. Mason giggled, just a little, and the spell was broken. Within seconds, Mason's mother pushed through the crowd, dropping to her knees. "Oh, thank God!" she sobbed, hugging her son and stroking Buddy in grateful disbelief. Festival volunteers crowded around, asking what happened. Carolyn hurried over, apologizing, half expecting to be scolded. Instead, she found herself surrounded by awe and relief. "He calmed Mason right down," a vendor said. "Did you see that? Like he just knew." "That's the dog from the news, isn't it?" asked another. Her tone changed now, less wary, more admiring. By the time the festival wound down, Buddy had become a minor celebrity. People snapped photos, children asked to pet him, and even the mayor stopped by to shake Carolyn's hand. "You gave that dog a second chance," he said quietly. "And look what he did." Maybe we all need to be more like Buddy, willing to see past first impressions. Carolyn's heart swelled with pride, mixed with relief. The shelter staff, who'd come to cheer them on, looked at Buddy with new respect. Alex, watching from a distance, wiped his eyes, then gave Carolyn a thumbs up. Driving home, Buddy sat tall in the back seat, red bandana bright against his fur, eyes shining. For the first time, Carolyn felt the town's skepticism begin to fade, replaced by something warmer, a sense of hope, of possibility. That night, as she jotted notes in her journal, Carolyn paused and smiled. "He did it," she wrote. "We did it. Maybe we're not so different after all. Maybe everyone deserves a chance to show what love can do when you refuse to give up." The buzz from the Dog Days festival followed Buddy everywhere. Suddenly, neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid him now stopped to ask about his heroic moment. Photos of Buddy lying next to Mason, the little boy he'd comforted, spread across town. The shelter's inbox filled with messages. "Is Buddy available for adoption? Can he visit my child's class?" For the first time, Carolyn felt real hope. Maybe this was the fresh start they both needed. A few days after the festival, Alex called with news that made Carolyn's heart skip. "A family wants to foster Buddy," he said. "The Johnsons. They were at the festival and saw everything. They have a little girl named Grace. Well, she could use a friend like Buddy." There was something in Alex's tone, cautious optimism, but with a warning underneath. "They understand he's a handful. I'll be with you every step. But it's their trial. It's Buddy's, too." Carolyn met the Johnsons on a muggy Thursday afternoon. They lived in a white ranch house with a red door and toys scattered across the front yard. Grace, shy and serious with dark curls and nervous hands, peeked from behind her mother as Buddy hopped out of the car, tail wagging in nervous circles. The Johnsons greeted Buddy with gentle smiles and open hearts, but their excitement was edged with uncertainty. Inside, Buddy roamed the house, sniffing every corner. Grace trailed after him, quiet but curious. When Buddy stopped to nuzzle a forgotten stuffed animal, Grace giggled, a small, bright sound that broke the ice. "He's so big," she whispered to Carolyn. "Is he scary?" Carolyn knelt down, meeting Grace's eyes. "He can be wild, but he just wants to be loved. Sometimes big hearts look a little messy on the outside." The first days of the home trial were a whirlwind. Buddy charmed Grace immediately, following her from room to room, curling up beside her as she read, letting her braid ribbons into his collar. But life with Buddy wasn't all heartwarming moments. He was still impulsive, still struggling to adjust to new rules and routines. On Saturday, as the Johnsons prepared dinner, Buddy darted through the kitchen, knocking a tray of lasagna to the floor. Sauce splattered the walls, noodles scattered, and Buddy, delighted by the chaos, licked everything in reach. Mr. Johnson cursed under his breath, frustration on his face. "He's a good dog," he said later, mopping the floor. "But maybe too much dog for us." On Sunday, a summer rainstorm rolled in, shaking the windows. Grace huddled on the couch, anxious, and Buddy, sensing her fear, climbed up beside her, pressing close until she wrapped her arms around his neck. For a few minutes, they both forgot the thunder outside. But setbacks kept coming. Buddy dragged the trash can across the living room. He jumped onto the dining table when nobody was looking. During a neighborhood walk, he lunged at a rabbit, almost pulling Grace off her feet. The Johnsons started to doubt if they could handle him. Their patience, stretched thin by work, chores, and the demands of a young child, began to fray. That evening, Mrs. Johnson called Carolyn, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure we're the right fit. He's so much work. Grace loves him, but it's hard." Carolyn listened, understanding every word, remembering her own nights of doubt. "He's learning," she said softly. "It takes time. He'll make mistakes. So will you. Maybe talk to Alex. He helped me figure out a routine." Alex visited the next day, carrying a box of training tools, treat pouches, puzzle toys, a calming vest. He sat with the Johnsons, mapping out a new structure. Short, frequent walks instead of one long one, a crate for downtime, clear rules, and lots of praise for even the smallest victories. He reminded them, "Buddy's had more homes than most people have shoes. He wants to do right. He just needs someone to show him how. And sometimes, the learning goes both ways." Grace was the first to rally. One night, after Buddy chewed up her favorite blanket in a fit of anxiety, she cried, but then sat beside him, stroking his ears. "It's okay," she whispered. "I get scared too. You can try again." Something in her words softened Buddy's worry, and he licked her hand, staying by her side until she fell asleep. The days that followed were a test for everyone. The Johnsons learned to manage Buddy's energy. Long morning walks before school, games of fetch in the backyard, frozen peanut butter treats for quiet time. Grace took charge of Buddy's good boy chart, drawing gold stars for every calm walk, every gentle greeting. She was his biggest cheerleader, reminding her parents of every time Buddy got something right. Still, the doubts lingered. Mr. Johnson worried about the ruined furniture, Mrs. Johnson about neighborhood complaints. Alex checked in, offering reassurance but never making promises. "He's a work in progress," he reminded them. "So are we all." One Friday evening, the Johnsons gathered in the living room for a family meeting. Grace stood up, clutching Buddy's leash, her chin high. "I want to keep trying," she said. "He needs us, and I think I need him too." There was a long, heavy silence. Then Mr. Johnson nodded, and Mrs. Johnson hugged Grace tight. "One more chance," she said quietly, tears in her eyes. "We'll try again. Together." Carolyn, hearing the news, smiled through tears. She wrote in her journal that night, "Sometimes the hardest work is just staying, even when you're tired, even when things get messy. Buddy's not perfect. Neither am I. Maybe that's how love works. 1,000 little second chances, one after another, until trust takes root." A week after the Johnsons' family meeting, Willow Creek simmered under a heavy, brooding sky. Summer storms were nothing new in Indiana, but this one felt different. The air was thick and still, insects chittering uneasily, the wind barely moving the sycamore leaves. Weather alerts scrolled across TV screens all day. Severe thunderstorms, possible flash flooding, stay indoors and stay safe. Most people did. But for kids and dogs, storms sometimes felt like adventure, not danger. By dusk, clouds massed over the town, dark as bruises, flickering with distant lightning. Buddy paced restlessly in the Johnsons' living room, ears pinned back, nose twitching as the barometric pressure dropped. Grace noticed first. "He doesn't like storms," she said, gently stroking his head. Buddy pressed close to her, tail thumping weakly. Mrs. Johnson glanced at the forecast and decided, "Let's all stay inside tonight, just in case." But sometimes, even the best-laid plans unravel in a heartbeat. At 8 o'clock, just as thunder shook the windows and the first fat drops began to fall, Grace's kitten, Peaches, darted out the back door into the yard. In a flash, Grace slipped on her rain boots and chased after her, barefoot, forgetting her raincoat, heart pounding with fear for her tiny friend. The storm hit like a freight train. Winds howled, rain slashed sideways, and the power blinked out. "Grace!" Mrs. Johnson called, running to the door, panic in her voice. "Grace, come back!" But Grace was already gone, lost in the thickening dark, the roar of wind and water swallowing her small cries. Inside, chaos erupted. Buddy barked, frantic, spinning in circles as if to will Grace back to safety. Mr. Johnson grabbed a flashlight and bolted out the door, rain battering his face, shouting for his daughter. Mrs. Johnson called 911 with shaking hands, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Outside, Grace slogged through the yard, rain stinging her cheeks, her nightgown plastered to her skin. Peaches' tiny mules drew her farther and farther from the porch, into the overgrown park beyond their fence, where water pooled in hollows and tree branches lashed the air. She could barely see, every flash of lightning illuminating strange, twisting shadows. She found Peaches at last, soaked, huddled under a bush, eyes wide with terror. Grace scooped up the kitten, hugging her tight. "It's okay. I've got you," she whispered, voice trembling. But when she turned back, she realized she was lost. The yard, the house, the familiar glow of porch lights, all vanished in the storm's fury. Grace's heart raced, panic rising in her chest. She tried to yell, but the wind tore the sound away. She huddled under a tree, clutching Peaches, shivering with cold and fear. Back at the house, Buddy was beside himself. He lunged at the door, barking so fiercely that the Johnsons barely recognized him. Mr. Johnson, flashlight in hand, stumbled through the backyard, calling Grace's name, but the rain was blinding, the wind so loud he could hardly hear himself. Suddenly, Buddy broke free, muscle and instinct surging together. He crashed through the screen door, bounding into the storm, nose to the ground, desperate. He paused, sniffing the air, then sprinted through the gate and into the wild, rain-lashed park. The Johnsons shouted after him, but Buddy was already gone, his shape swallowed by darkness. For long, breathless minutes, all anyone could do was hope. Grace, huddled under the dripping branches, heard a crashing noise, heavy, fast, relentless. Her first thought was fear. Then, through the storm, she saw two gleaming eyes and the familiar outline of a massive chocolate lab. "Buddy!" she cried, her voice cracking with relief. Buddy barreled toward her, whining, pressing his nose to her shoulder, licking her wet cheeks, circling her protectively. He settled beside her, pressing his warm body against hers and Peach's, sheltering them as best he could from the driving rain. Grace clung to him, her fear easing just a little. Every time she shivered or whimpered, Buddy let out a low, rumbling whine, steady and calm, as if to say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Back at the house, the neighbors had joined the search, flashlights flickering across yards and alleyways. The 911 dispatcher assured Mrs. Johnson that officers were on the way. But before they could arrive, one neighbor spotted a dark shape by the edge of the park, unmoving in the downpour. "I think I see something," she called. Moments later, the search party converged. Mr. Johnson's flashlight beam caught the glint of Buddy's collar, then Grace's small, shaking form clinging to his side. "Grace!" he shouted, relief and tears mingling. He scooped his daughter up, kitten and all, hugging her fiercely while Buddy barked in triumph, tail wagging so hard it nearly knocked him over. The group hurried back to the house, where Mrs. Johnson sobbed with gratitude, wrapping Grace and Peaches in towels, then hugging Buddy as if he were a person, not a dog. Neighbors cheered. Police arrived to find everything already resolved. The town's problem dog was a hero. News of the rescue spread quickly. By sunrise, social media was buzzing with photos of Buddy, soaked and shivering but alive, lying at Grace's feet. The local paper ran a front-page story, "Big-hearted Buddy saves girl and kitten during storm." The shelter's phone rang off the hook. Donations, adoption offers, messages of thanks. Even those who doubted Buddy now saw him differently, not as a menace, but as a guardian, a friend. That evening, as the sun broke through the last clouds, the Johnsons sat on the porch with Grace, Peaches, and Buddy. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Grace hugged Buddy tight, whispering, "Thank you for finding me. You're my hero." Buddy licked her cheek, content, his tail beating a steady rhythm of belonging. In that moment, surrounded by family, love, and a town forever changed, Buddy knew he was finally home. Summer in Willow Creek always ended with a parade. But this year, the Second Chance Parade felt like more than tradition. It felt like a celebration of hope, of redemption, of the kind of love that refuses to quit. For the first time, Buddy would be leading the procession, a role reserved for the town's most inspiring rescue. People lined Main Street early, some with homemade signs, "Buddy the Brave. Everyone deserves a second chance. Thank you, Buddy." While local news crews set up their cameras, eager to catch every moment. The days after the storm had passed in a blur of gratitude and reflection. The Johnsons found themselves at the center of the community's attention, fielding calls, emails, even home-baked casseroles from neighbors who'd once kept their distance. Grace became a mini-celebrity at school, her classmates clamoring to hear the story of how Buddy had found her and Peaches in the storm. For Grace, the memory of fear was already fading, replaced by pride, a sense that she too was part of something much bigger. Carolyn, meanwhile, was invited to speak at the parade. She'd never been comfortable with crowds, but she felt a deep responsibility. As she stood on the temporary stage, microphone trembling in her hand, she scanned the sea of faces. Some she knew, many she didn't. Alex smiled encouragement from the front row. Staff from Willow Creek Animal Rescue, waving and cheering. I used to believe some dogs just needed more patience, Carolyn began, her voice steadying with each word. But what I've learned from Buddy is that sometimes we all need a little more understanding. Not just dogs, but people too. Sometimes it takes more than one second chance. Sometimes it takes a whole community. Buddy, dressed in his red bandana and a big blue ribbon, sat at Carolyn's feet, tail thumping as the crowd erupted in applause. The parade started with Buddy and Grace at the front, walking side by side, Peaches riding in a basket adorned with flowers. Behind them marched families with their own adopted dogs, seniors who'd finally found a home, shy dogs transformed by patience, once aggressive pups now gentle and trusted. Banners overhead read, "Every dog deserves a home," and as the procession wound its way through town, people tossed confetti and handed out treats to the animals. For the Johnsons, the day was more than a celebration. It was a welcome home. They'd weathered doubt, frustration, and sleepless nights. But now their house was alive with laughter and energy. Even the neighbors who once complained about barking now dropped by with treats and toys. The backyard was always full. Buddy chasing Grace and her friends, Peaches sunning herself on the porch, Mr. Johnson grilling with Buddy at his side, Mrs. Johnson tending flowers with Buddy dozing in the shade. The shelter changed, too. Donations poured in after the news story, enough to fund repairs and add new runs for larger dogs. Alex, moved by the outpouring, started a new program matching big-hearted dogs with foster families willing to try, fail, and try again. Volunteers doubled, training sessions expanded, and dogs once overlooked now found themselves at the center of attention. The shelter's bulletin board overflowed with adoption updates and thank you notes. Buddy's story inspired more than just the town. Nursing homes and schools invited him for visits, where he would patiently endure children's hugs or sit calmly beside nervous seniors who'd lost their own pets. His calm presence eased anxieties, bridged generations, and sparked conversations about compassion and resilience. Carolyn found new purpose in her days. She joined Alex in speaking to civic groups, sharing not only Buddy's journey, but her own. "We judge so quickly," she'd say, "forgetting that some of us carry wounds others can't see. The best things I ever did, I almost didn't do because I was afraid." She saw in herself the same lessons she'd seen in Buddy: patience, forgiveness, the courage to keep showing up. At the parade's end, the mayor called Buddy and Carolyn to the stage. "Willow Creek is better because we chose not to give up," he announced, pinning a medal to Buddy's collar. "This is not just for Buddy, but for everyone who's ever tried again, and everyone who's ever been brave enough to hope." The crowd roared. Carolyn wiped tears from her eyes, and even Alex, always steady, cheered so loud his voice broke. That evening, as twilight settled over town, the Johnsons hosted a barbecue. Families gathered in their yard, dogs tumbled across the grass, and Buddy, never far from Grace's side, basked in the joy of belonging. Music floated through open windows, neighbors told stories, and laughter filled the air. In the kitchen, Carolyn and Mrs. Johnson prepared dessert together, marveling at how quickly a stranger could become a friend. Later, as fireworks bloomed over Willow Creek, Carolyn sat quietly on the porch, Buddy's head heavy on her lap. She watched the sky fill with color, thought of all the times she'd doubted, all the nights she'd wondered if she was too much or not enough. Now she knew What made life messy also made it beautiful. She whispered to Buddy, "We're right where we belong, aren't we?" Buddy sighed in contentment, his tail brushing the porch floor. As the last sparkles faded, the town gathered for one final cheer, their voices blending in a chorus that echoed long after the lights dimmed. They weren't just celebrating a dog, they were celebrating every act of faith, every risk, every second chance that made their community whole. And in the soft glow of summer's end, Willow Creek was changed, not by perfection, but by love that refused to give up. By the time autumn rolled over Willow Creek, the air was crisp with promise. Leaves spiraled down in fiery swirls, painting the sidewalks gold and red. The summer's commotion faded, replaced by a gentler rhythm. School buses rumbling at dawn, neighbors raking their lawns, Buddy and Grace crunching through piles of leaves on their morning walks. It was the season for quiet reflection, and for Carolyn, it was time to take stock of everything that had changed, not only in Buddy, but in herself, and in the town around them. One evening, Carolyn sat on her porch with Buddy sprawled at her feet, his big head resting against her worn slippers. She rocked gently, sipping chamomile tea, listening to the distant laughter of children and the low hum of life settling for the night. The porch light cast a soft circle around them, cocooning them in warmth. Buddy sighed, his breath slow and deep, content in the safety of home. Carolyn thought back to those first wild days, the constant noise, the broken vases, Buddy's anxious pacing, her own doubts and exhaustion. She remembered the way he had whimpered at her bedroom door, the countless times he'd chewed something out of nervousness or fear. She had wondered, back then, if she had made a mistake, if she was too old, too set in her ways, too alone to handle a dog like Buddy. But now, with the cool breeze rustling the last of the summer's roses, she could see how every step of the journey had mattered. She thought about the nights Buddy had settled by her side, his warmth pressing away her loneliness, the mornings he'd pulled her out of bed, demanding walks and sunshine and the simple joy of moving forward. She smiled, brushing her hand through his soft fur. "We've come a long way, haven't we, big guy?" she murmured. Buddy wagged his tail, his gaze steady on hers, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Carolyn's thoughts drifted to the shelter, to Alex and the staff who had fought for Buddy's second chance. She saw now that what the world had labeled too much, too loud, too messy, too needy, was just love with nowhere to go. How often, she wondered, had people and animals alike been dismissed for not fitting neatly into someone else's idea of enough? How many families missed out on love because they couldn't see past the rough edges? She realized that patience, real, stubborn patience, was what turned trouble into trust. Buddy hadn't changed overnight. Neither had she. There had been setbacks, messes, mistakes. There were still days when Buddy would get spooked by thunder or bark too loudly at a passing bicycle. There were still times when Carolyn's grief for her husband pressed sharp and cold in her chest. But every time they stumbled, they got back up, together. She thought about Grace and the Johnsons, about how opening their home to Buddy had meant opening their hearts to struggle and uncertainty. "It's the hard parts that teach us the most," Carolyn wrote in her journal one night. "If we only love when it's easy, we miss the best parts, the forgiveness, the resilience, the joy that grows from doing the hard thing again and again." Buddy, for all his chaos and energy, had been the key to her own healing. He had forced her into the world, made her greet her neighbors, helped her rediscover the thrill of learning something new. He had shown her how courage wasn't about fearlessness, but about trying, failing, and trying again. Carolyn's mind wandered to the broader changes in Willow Creek. The town felt different, somehow lighter and more connected. She noticed more people at the dog park, more volunteers at the shelter, more conversations that started with, "Remember, buddy?" The shelter's new policy, more time for every dog, more compassion, less judgment, was a living testament to what patience could do. She saw, too, how Buddy's journey had been a mirror for her own. She'd spent so long trying to live up to other people's expectations, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect volunteer. But perfection was a myth. What mattered was presence, resilience, and the willingness to love even when it was messy or inconvenient. Some evenings, Grace would visit with her parents, and the house would ring with laughter. Buddy would bounce between them all, basking in the attention, never quite losing his enthusiasm or his oversized affection. Carolyn marveled at the way the walls, once echoing with silence, now pulsed with the music of life. One Saturday, as she sat with Alex and Mrs. Johnson on the porch, the conversation turned reflective. "It's funny," Alex mused. "We started with a dog no one wanted. Now he's the reason half the town believes in second chances." Mrs. Johnson nodded. "He taught us all to try harder, to forgive faster, and not to give up on each other, or ourselves." Carolyn smiled, gratitude swelling in her chest. "I think he taught me the biggest lesson of all. Belonging isn't about being perfect or fitting in. It's about finding the place where your too much is exactly what someone else needs." She realized, too, that her own healing was ongoing. There would always be moments of doubt, flashes of loneliness, but now she knew she wasn't alone. Not with Buddy, not with her friends and neighbors, not in a town that had learned to embrace imperfection. As twilight deepened, Carolyn set down her mug and stretched her legs. Buddy rolled over, offering his belly for a scratch. She laughed, a sound bright and easy. "Come on, you old goof, let's go inside." Buddy leapt up, ready for whatever adventure came next. Inside, the house glowed with the warmth of family and belonging, proof that love, real love, wasn't a quick fix or a perfect fit, but a daily practice of patience, acceptance, and the courage to try again. Months passed, and winter crept gently into Willow Creek, dusting rooftops with frost and turning the park into a patchwork of silvery grass and muddy paths. Life had settled into a comfortable pattern. Buddy had become a fixture, not just in the Johnson home or at Carolyn's, but throughout the entire town. He was more than that big shelter dog. He was Buddy, the heart of a community that had learned together the meaning of second chances. Each week, Buddy's days filled with new purpose. He visited Maplewood Elementary with Grace, letting nervous children read to him, patiently enduring hats and feather boas during library dress-up days. He rode along with Carolyn to Willow Gardens, where seniors waited on the porch, eager for the warmth of a friendly muzzle and the solid reassurance of his broad head resting on their knees. People who had once dismissed him now vied for a moment of his time. The shelter's wall of hope had become the pride of Willow Creek. What started as a single photograph of Buddy and Grace, both smiling, both changed, had grown into a patchwork of faces. Senior dogs curled up on plush beds, three-legged pups running through backyards, once anxious animals sprawled across living room floors. Beside each picture, a letter told the story of a family who had stretched a little, waited a little longer, and found something beautiful in the mess. Alex found new purpose as well. Inspired by Buddy's transformation, he launched a town-wide program, pairing misunderstood dogs with patient foster families. He spent his afternoons teaching children about trust, resilience, and the power of believing in someone even when it seemed hopeless. He often quoted Carolyn, "Sometimes what's too much for the world is exactly the right amount of love for a home that needs it most." Carolyn herself surprised everyone, including herself. When the local paper invited her to write an essay, she hesitated, but eventually found the words pouring out late one night. She titled it, "Why We Need Room for Big Love." In it, she described how Buddy had forced her to set aside her perfectionism, to forgive more quickly, to accept what she couldn't change, and to hold fast to what truly mattered. The piece was shared far and wide, across county lines, across the state, even drawing letters from strangers who saw themselves in Buddy's journey. Thanksgiving brought the first annual Feast for All Tales, a potluck for adopters, volunteers, and families, anyone touched by the magic of a second chance. That afternoon, the community center rang with laughter, the clatter of serving spoons, and the cheerful barking of dogs who were at last home. Grace read her story of the storm aloud, voice trembling with pride, while Buddy sat proudly at her side, wearing his now famous red bandana. Later, as the autumn dusk settled, Carolyn slipped out to the park with Buddy. The air was sharp, but her heart was warm. She watched as Buddy ran, nose to the wind, through piles of crunchy leaves. Alex joined her on a bench, both quiet for a long while. "I never would have believed it," Alex said finally. "All that time I thought Buddy was the hard case. But it was us who needed to change. Needed to slow down, be more patient, make more room." Carolyn nodded. "He gave us a gift we didn't even know we needed." That winter, Willow Creek felt different. Gentler, more open, a little braver. The annual tree lighting ceremony was packed. Buddy at the front with Grace guiding Santa's sleigh. New volunteers signed up at the shelter, eager to help another imperfect dog find a home. Families who once said no to difficult animals now told stories of muddy paw prints, chewed slippers, and love that was bigger than their doubts. Buddy's legend grew, not as a miracle or a mascot, but as proof that the hardest things to love are often the most worth loving. The town's social media filled with stories: an elderly widower who found a friend in an old beagle, a foster family who discovered courage in the smallest, most anxious terrier. Everywhere, Buddy's name was shorthand for "Don't give up, not yet." One afternoon, Carolyn stood by the wall of hope at the shelter, reading each letter, each happy ending. Alex joined her, handing her a steaming cup of cider. "You know," he said, "I think Buddy's changed more lives than any of us ever will." She smiled. "He changed mine first." In her own home, Carolyn found herself changed too. She kept her door open to new foster dogs, each with their own stories, their own rough edges. She took more walks, called Erica more often, wrote letters she finally sent. The house was always a little messy, always full of life. Sometimes at night, she'd watch Buddy sleeping by the fire, chest rising and falling. The red bandana faded, but bright. She'd think about how love had overflowed every boundary, every expectation, how letting go of perfection had made room for the kind of connection that endures. The annual Feast for All Tales became the most anticipated event in Willow Creek. Families brought dishes and stories, children played tag with the dogs, volunteers swapped training tips and laughter. Even those who'd once given up on the idea of family found a place at the table. In her closing speech that year, Carolyn summed up what Buddy had taught them all. Love isn't measured by how easy it is. It's measured by how fiercely it endures, even when it's messy, even when it's hard, even when it scares us. Sometimes what we need most isn't less too much, but more space for every wild, beautiful thing we can offer each other. As Buddy ran through the twilight, leaves swirling around him, Carolyn knew the legacy was bigger than any one story. It was a town changed by patience, by second chances, by the courage to try again. It was every home that made space for another too much, every heart that found the room to love without limits. And so, Willow Creek moved forward, one rescue, one family, one lesson at a time, grateful for the reminder that what makes us different is often what makes us shine.